The committee will reconvene. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Madam Chair, I move the committee grant S.J. Res. 18, disapproving the rule submitted by the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection relating to overdraft lending, very large financial institutions, a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule waives providing that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services and their respective designees, or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to commit. The rule further provides for consideration of S.J. Res. 28, disapproving the rule submitted by the Bureau of Financial Protection related to defining larger participants of a market for general use digital consumer payment applications under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to commit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 1526, the No Rogue Rulings Act of 2025 under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides the amendment in the nature of substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary now printed. The bill shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 22, the SAVE Act, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the House Administration or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides that House Resolution 23 and House Resolution 164 are laid on the table. The rule provides that a motion to discharge a committee from consideration of a bill or resolution that by relating in substance to or dealing with the same subject matter is substantially the same as House Resolution 23 shall not be in order. The rule provides that a motion to discharge the Committee on Rules from consideration of a resolution providing for a special order of business for the consideration of a bill or resolution that by relating in substance to or dealing with the same subject matter is substantially the same as House Res. 23 shall not be in order. Finally, the rule provides that a motion to discharge on the calendar of motions to discharge committees that is rendered out of order shall be stricken from that calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern.
After sitting here an hour, yeah, we do have some.
I
amendments,
apologize for the delay.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike Section 5 of the resolution, which prevents the House of Representatives from voting on the Lunar, Pedersen, and Jacobs resolution on remote voting for new parents. Madam Chair, we know why we're here today. Well, I was going to say at 8 a.m., now close to 9. I called it out last night, and I see I've been proven right this morning. This rule is unprecedented. Never, never in the history of the House has the Rules Committee acted to just outright kill a discharge petition that was already signed by a majority of the House. So you're making history. Petitions have only ever been turned off in a rule when the legislation was considered through another avenue. Now, let me be clear about what has happened with the remote voting for new parents resolution. Members worked across the aisle to draft a compromise version of that common sense provision. A bipartisan majority of this House then expressed its will to take that resolution to the floor. Members followed the rules, the same rules that were in place when I was chair of this committee, the same basic rules that have been in place for 100 years. Discharge is a very difficult process. It is rarely successful. And when it is successful, it's usually because the Speaker is blocking something that is common sense. And that's the case here. A majority of this House supports the Luna Pedersen rule to allow new parents to vote remotely because it is common sense and because this is 2025, not 1925. The Republican leadership has been curiously silent on one of their members voting by proxy from Hollywood, of all places. And they've been silent on the member who cast his vote for him in violation of the rules of the House of Representatives. And we're told that there are other Republicans who have voted by proxy. And we want an accounting of that. We want to get to the truth on all of that, but not a word about voter fraud. But you guys are falling all over yourselves to block mothers with newborn babies from voting remotely. And you're not just blocking one resolution, you're blocking any similar resolution from being brought up again. I mean, this is not only unprecedented, it is shameful. And let me speak directly to the bipartisan group of members who support allowing members who are new parents to vote. If this rule is reported out, any member who signed the discharge petition should vote no on the rule to allow the Lunar resolution to come to the floor. We here at the Rules Committee can come right back upstairs and report out a new rule for these bills without this provision. Don't help this committee kill something you support. To be clear, they can't do this without your help. The Rules Committee should be about facilitating ideas and legislation for consideration on the floor. This should not be the place where democracy goes to die. I urge a yes vote on this amendment, and I yield back.
Are there other members who wish to speak on the amendment? I will.
Yes, I think
Okay.
we do.
I will speak briefly because I've been public in my views via an op-ed and because we need to get this rule reported to get to the week's legislative business. The fact is, I've been outspoken on this because I do believe it's an existential issue for this body. In fact, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, Congress is defined as the, quote, act of coming together and meeting. I've never voted by proxy because I believe it undermines the fabric of that sacred act of convening. I know there's a new laptop class in America that seems to operate increasingly in a virtual space, but that's simply not a fact of life for most of American workers, and I believe Congress should live by that standard. Our nation's construction workers can't bill by proxy. Our nation's police can't keep the streets safe by proxy. Teachers can't educate our students through the act of proxy. And let's not forget how dependently we were on service workers and delivery employees to get us the goods we needed during COVID. Where would we have been if they decided to proxy their responsibilities? I understand that some of my colleagues are pinning their hopes on the fact that things will go according to plan and that proxy voting can be limited to select classes, and those in authority can be trusted to enforce the rules. However, in the course of human events, things rarely ever go according to plan, and this isn't a theoretical. The Democrats implemented proxy voting during COVID, and it was a disaster. We had one member who was submitting his proxy letter so that he could moonlight a second job. We simply cannot throw this important decision to chance. It will take only a slight reconfiguration of the deck chairs in this body to put Democrats back in charge and put us on a path to proxy voting without limitation. I support the provision in the rules related to proxy voting, and I ask my colleagues to support the work of this committee by voting for it on the floor. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'd yield first to the ranking member.
Yeah, first of all, Madam Chair, I, as the person who wrote the proxy provision during COVID, I never voted proxy ever. But there are members of this Rules Committee, Republican members of this Rules Committee who did. The Speaker of the House, current Speaker of the House, did. And I should point out to you that proxy voting allowed Congress to safely operate during a national crisis. During the 1918 pandemic, the House was unable to function without unanimous consent agreements because many members couldn't attend session in person. They even needed unanimous consent to pass an urgently needed bill to get doctors to rural areas after days of negotiating. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, proxy voting allowed us to continue our work as normal, unlike in 1918. And what's more, proxy voting actually increased voter participation in the House. Based on vote analysis by CQ roll call, House members participated in a record 98% of roll call votes taken in 2021 and 2022, the highest rate of voting in the House since at least 1953, when they began tracking this number. Since proxy voting was scrapped by the GOP, voting participation rates have dropped. More members voting means more Americans are being represented in each vote. And in case my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have forgotten, strong representation is a good thing for our democracy, or perhaps they haven't forgotten, and so that's why they propose this. I will also point out again what I mentioned in the opening. The hypocrisy here is stunning. You have members of your own party right now who, in violation of the House rules, are voting for proxy, and you are all silent. You are all silent. And and what we are talking about here is allowing new parents to be able to continue to participate in voting, to be able to do their job, and to represent their constituents. I get it. If you don't believe that, vote no. But members of this House, in a bipartisan way, followed the rules. And, they get over 218 people to sign a discharge petition. And under the discharge rules, we are supposed to be able to consider that, and you are killing that in this rule. I yield back to the gentlelady.
Thank you. I think it is stunning, and it's stunningly clear that this rule would overturn the majority will of this House. The ranking member said it's not 1925, it's not 1825 either. We do have women in the House of Representatives now. Granted, it's only about a quarter of us, but we should, as the rest of the world has, figure out how to facilitate the participation of women in our elected government. This is a very simple matter. No one is suggesting that we allow proxy voting under every circumstance. This is a common sense proposal. And the fact that this rule would not only forbid a vote on the bipartisan measure that has already gained majority support in this House, but goes further and forbids any measure that would allow proxy voting for new parents to be brought to the floor is really pretty horrifying and out of touch with where the world is today. I yield back.
Any other members seek recognition?
Madam Chair,
Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
the hypocrisy of having a party that speaks of family values but would not allow a mother with a newborn to stay home and be able to vote, that would force a congresswoman like Brittany Patterson had to do to bring a small, vulnerable infant on a plane to vote on a matter of importance to her constituents and to this nation. How shameful to say you stand for family values but will not allow a newborn to stay safely at home with their mother. That is what is so disturbing about what you are doing. And the hypocrisy of saying, I am not going to allow this to happen when Republicans have done it over and over again. Republicans voted by proxy at one time. 162 Republicans voted by proxy, and not one of you at the time had a newborn baby you had to care for, and that could be put at risk when you put her on the plane. I ride with Brittany Patterson. I rode with Brittany Patterson on the plane when she brought her teeny tiny baby because she thought it was such an important vote. It takes like 3 of us to help her get off the plane because there's so much stuff that you have to do when you're a brand newborn. And she has another child at home, so she comes by herself. You have Republicans who also want to be able to be mothers and serve. And this is not an open-ended proxy vote. This is for those who are new parents and need to care for that newborn. The 39 times that the speaker voted by proxy 39 times, and I know that, and not a single one of those times was he needing to stay with a newborn and care for them. The American people want our institution to reflect the country and to have that kind of change. Not to speak of the fact that you are changing the rules after the fact. After the fact, right? They did all of that hard work. They said, what do we need to do to get a discharge petition? We need to convince our members, we need to convince enough Republicans, we need to convince enough Democrats to be willing to go down on the rail of their house and sign their name. And so for everybody who signed their name, who had the courage to say this is the right thing to do, you are saying there is no right thing in Congress because we get to change the rules on you whenever we want. So the courage you had for all of those who signed the petition, and especially Republicans who were willing to put themselves out and say, I know leadership doesn't want to bring this, but I am going to have the courage to stand for this principle and sign my name and put my name out there. You were all telling them their courage is worth nothing. Because after the fact, we are changing the rules in this rule committee. Let us vote. If you don't agree with the proxy voting for parents with newborns, vote no. It's simple as that. If you don't agree with the principle of this matter, vote no. But let the members vote. Let the members vote. With that, I yield back.
I have a unanimous consent. I seek unanimous consent to introduce an article entitled Pro-Family House Republicans Want to Scuttle Resolution Allowing New Parents to Proxy Vote. It's published March 29th, 2025 in Vanity Fair.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Is it an article or a motion?
I was seeking unanimous consent to introduce the article. Yes.
Madam Chair, just to, not everybody was here during COVID, but I do want the record to reflect that Ms. Fishbach, Mr. Norman, and Mr. Scott, all voted by proxy that time. Well, you did, and so, but now you want to vote to deny new parents the ability to do that.
Mr. Norman, you recognize.
I'm not going to sit here and let y'all lecture on hypocrisy. I'm not going to sit here and let you lecture on abandoning mothers. I'm just not going to hear it. Now, Ms. McGovern, since you brought me up, the rule was in place. I voted less than 5% of the votes. We had 580.
63 times.
I voted for other, and I'll gladly accept that. But proxy voting is wrong. When you take this job, with it, you have to come to work. You have to be present. And if y'all talk about, empathy, where was your empathy with never mentioning you had a president who was incapacitated? Where was your empathy when you let 15 million people come in here? Where was your empathy when children were being abused coming across the border? I'm sick of listening to your rhetoric because it doesn't match your actions. We have every right to do this. I like Ms. Luna. I've told her personally, I disagree with proxy voting. And do it the right way. Was not being heard in committee. That we all have that. I've got a term limit, so I'm having trouble getting a hearing on, getting a markup. We all go through that, but you work through the process, and that's what I disagree with the way Ms. Luna is doing this. So, cut the words out, because I don't know if I can continue to listen to what y'all are saying on this one issue. We have greater issues to go over. I yield back.
Madam Chair, if I could just respond.
Mr. McGovern, you've already spoken.
We can be here all day then. We'll just drag this out. We waited an hour while you fought amongst yourselves, and we're hearing this from a guy who voted by proxy 63 times, and he voted by proxy to go to a CPAC convention, of all things. So, don't sit here and try to say that we're lecturing you. We're just stunned by the hypocrisy here. We're stunned by the hypocrisy. It's okay for you to vote by proxy to go to a CPAC convention, but you find it objectionable to provide that ability to new parents. And on top of that, you have members right now in your conference who are voting against the House rules, and you're all quiet. You're all providing a circle of protection around them as if it's no big deal. Well, if this is such a big deal, then why don't you hold these members accountable in your party right now who are voting by proxy against the House rules.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
right now, across the country, for the most part, there are tens of millions of Americans who are waking up, getting in their car, going to work, showing up to do the job that they are required to do. Plumbers, electricians, people that have to go work countless hours during the day, multiple jobs, and they have to show up. The question here is there's a debatable proposition as to whether or not, in the age of electronic voting, the ability to communicate, whether or not we should set up some rules that allow us to do our job not physically present. The fact that some individuals, Republican or Democrat, violate the rules does not mean that that should be an argument for making the rules more lenient, expanding the ability for them to do it. It's just a recognition that some people are violating the rules. Should there be consequences? Probably. Okay? Whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. If our rules are you got to be physically present to vote, then you should follow the damn rules and be physically present to vote. I don't care who you are or what you're doing. But when you change the rules, as our Democratic colleagues did, when you change the rules to allow proxy voting, then you change the institution. The Founding Fathers debated proxy voting and specifically rejected it. Franklin brought it up in the Articles of Confederation. It was specifically rejected. It was brought up again in the debate in the Constitutional Convention for our United States Constitution. It was specifically rejected, and it was rejected because there was a belief that we needed to have people in Congress and that it mattered that you be physically present and look each other in the eye and do the work that you were sent here to do. That is very clear. And now we have the situation where you say, well, we're going to criticize. Now, I never proxy voted. Not once. I never voted for someone. I never proxy voted for myself. Not once. Because I knew the damage that it was doing to the institution. We had 5 Democrats who voted 90% of the time by proxy voting in the first half of the 117th Congress. 5 Democrats voted 90% of the time by proxy voting. That is not Congress coming together in Congress. And when you then set up a proxy voting structure, then you're putting pressure on the members who are managing their lives, doing what they need to do, going back to their districts, and then a vote is called by leadership who knows that a large block of their folks are going to vote by proxy, so there's no pressure on them. So if you're trying to do it the right way, and then you're forced to drop everything to show up to vote, when the rest are proxy voting and sitting on their ass in their bedroom or on a boat, as one member literally was on a boat in the middle of a hearing, then that's what we've done to the institution. So you've now just turned it on its head. And then when you have proxy voting, you are then allowing upwards of either the entire body, or certainly even if you keep the quorum requirement of physical presence, you could have all but, 216 members that are never showing up. You could have members who are on their deathbed who just don't show up to vote. Physical presence actually matters. And this whole notion that, we follow the rules, we're the rules followers, right? And remember that it was, in fact, Speaker Pelosi who turned off the ability to ripen a discharge petition during her tenure. That happened. Of course it happened. I could go through a bunch of the different arguments on the data and looking at the different examples that we've had. The Charlie Crist example, attending SpaceX, not showing up to vote. It's replete with examples. It does not change the fact that there is a reasonable debate. It was debated at the founding. It can be debated now in the modern age. It is a reasonable debate. Should we be able to vote electronically from our districts and just scrap it? Should we turn this building into something else? Just do it remotely. Why even physically be here? And we can shake our head that these are actually reasonable debates to have, but to have the debate where we can decide as an institution what is in the health and well-being of the institution. But keep in mind when you have a discharge petition, which is adopted under a closed rule on the discharge, you then have just said, here it is, take it or leave it, as the proposition that is put forward on the body, an unamendable proposition that a large chunk of the body would like to see debates on the amendment, on being able to change it. But we're being forced to decide, what are you going to do on that particular proposition? For me, I believe we should show up to work. I believe, like every other single American who has to physically get in their car, go get in traffic, go show up to their job, go show up to the job site, go work all day in the sun, working on homes, building and constructing houses that we live in, doctors and nurses and people who have to show up and physically be present, that if you are one of 435 people representing 335 million Americans, you can show up and do your job physically present in town. And if you have a reason why you cannot, whether you're an expectant mother, whether your mom or dad is on their deathbed, whether you're unable to come because you just had a child and you're a dad, whether you are someone who is sick and battling cancer and needs to be in treatment, all things that have been true for time memoriam for all of the people who have served in this body. It is important that we meet in Congress. And that if you're, again, of the 435 people of 335 million, that you then are physically able to come here and vote. And if you can't, then the whip can take that under consideration. Because a large number of the work we do sometimes doesn't have everybody present. And that's okay. That's why you have debates about quorums. And you can have that debate, and then the leadership can choose when to put it on the floor. But that is what is at stake here, is the future of the institution. And I appreciate the gentlelady from North Carolina's remarks, and I appreciate and associate myself with them. I yield back.
Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to recognize, I want to yield to the ranking member.
Yeah, I mean, Madam Chair, I mean, it's really hard to sit here and listen to all of that. I mean, first of all, what the gentleman is talking about is not what is in this rule. We're not talking about, blanket proxy voting. We're talking about proxy voting for new parents. That's what we're talking about. So maybe you ought to read the rule. And secondly, in terms of changing this House, what you are doing here in this rule is changing this House. This rule is unprecedented. Never in the history of the House Rules, has the House Rules Committee ever acted to just outright kill a discharge petition that was already signed by a majority of this House. This is unprecedented. So you are changing the character of this House. You are further shutting down the ability of people to debate. You want to debate? Let's have a debate on the floor. All of you are too cowardly to bring this bill to the House floor so we can have a debate, because you're afraid you're going to lose. But a majority of this House, including many Republicans, support this effort. And so the idea that somehow, listening to this diatribe by the gentleman, has nothing to do with what we are talking about here right now. Not a thing. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Sorry, Mr. Roy? I'm happy to yield a moment to you.
To say that it doesn't have a thing to do with it is ridiculous, because we literally just went through a time in Congress where we had open-ended proxy voting, and by the way, no requirement of having a physical presence.
That is not what the discharge petition is.
Well, it's your time.
Sure. Here's a question, I guess. I certainly echo the sentiments expressed by the ranking member. I cannot fathom that Republicans are proposing in this rule an effort to kill the discharge petition filed by one of their own members. And by doing so are setting a new precedent that the discharge petition is effectively toothless in the House of Representatives. That any member of this body, including any Republican member who wishes to use this as a vehicle to enable consideration on the floor of an important policy or substantive legislative consideration, won't have that avenue. And Mr. Roy, whom I respect and value our partnership on a variety of different issues, but I do have to say, I mean, I am surprised, because Ms. Luna is not the only Republican who has pursued a discharge petition. Have you pursued discharge petitions?
Would the gentleman yield?
I am asking, yeah, of course.
When we were in the minority, I've signed discharge petitions.
No, I'm not asking whether you signed one. Have you initiated one? You have.
In what context?
You initiated a discharge petition 3 years ago.
Yeah.
4 years ago, I'm sorry, on the border health provisions under COVID-19. You were very passionate about that.
Who was in the majority?
Yeah, I understand Democrats were in the majority. So the discharge, so your position is that no discharge petition should be considered if that discharge petition has been initiated by a member of the majority party? That's the new rule?
No, the discharge petition, I think, ought to have to go through the process. If you're unable to go, if you're unable to have amendments and unable to then have something where it's an open rule or the ability to, the whole point of the discharge petition is to bring forward something that you're having trouble, right, getting through the process.
You weren't asking for that when you introduced your discharge petition.
Yeah, because we were in the minority, right? We were in the minority. And
Okay, so
the question becomes, like, when you have an issue, and if you're, in this case, the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Luna.
Sure.
And she has a passion on this issue, which I get, and I can see that it's a debatable topic. But it has been brought forward with a basically majority, all Democrats, and about 12 Republicans on the discharge petition, if I have my math right on the numbers. Okay, great. So that block of majority feels that way.
because she can't convince her caucus to enable her, the speaker apparently, to enable the committees to actually consider this.
Well, we've had debates on our, well, I don't want to take your time.
I mean, but I hear you, Mr. Roy. I mean, I guess my point is, what options are you leaving her? So she files a discharge petition because she cannot, Republicans refuse to be able to ultimately have a debate about this particular bill and vote on the bill in committee. That option is foreclosed because Republicans have decided they won't allow it. So then she pursues a discharge petition, which she is entitled to do under the rules of the House, which House members have been doing since time immemorial, and that avenue is now closed. Essentially, what you're just saying is, we will not have a discussion, we won't have a debate, we won't have a vote on this particular issue in the 119th Congress, period. Why? Because you've decided, and I understand you're passionate about it, I get it, but that's inconsistent, to be candid, in my view, inconsistent with the way in which you have approached these debates in the past, where you're willing to have an open debate and an open process by which we ultimately can, render our own views and let it kind of fall, let the chips fall where they may. And that's not what's happening
Gentleman
here.
yield for
Sure.
So it is difficult to convey what you have in private conversations with people without divulging private conversations, right? So it's a careful line to walk. But let's just say for the record, there have been countless conversations about the hearings that we could have, the processes we could follow to have a reasonable debate about this very complex question to protect the institution and try to accomplish and accommodate the concerns we have as people who are family members, who have all of these issues we have to deal with. The number of times that my wife has had to, not to get personal about the sacrifices she makes when I'm not home, and that my children, when they're upset, when I don't make events, and when we've got all the pressures we have as family members, that this is something we all experience. We've had these conversations. We believe there are processes to have. We could have, for example, in the subcommittee on the Constitution, a robust debate about.
I've been indulgent. I hear you.
Sorry.
I will just simply say, while I appreciate you having conversations, none of those processes have materialized. Committees could decide, the discharge petition has been active for some time. If the House Republican majority wanted to consider this issue, they could have compelled their committee chairs to hold a hearing, have a debate, hold a vote, and then come back to the Rules Committee and suggest that perhaps, in their view, this discharge petition shouldn't be considered because the process was already well underway. That's not what's happening here. So again, I'll simply say this, and I want to yield a moment to the ranking member, but every Republican member who might be tuning in, I know you have a conference meeting right now, so I don't know if this is being telegraphed there in real time, but I hope you each will go back to tell your colleagues that there is no point in any Republican member of Congress pursuing a discharge petition, because the new rule, as Mr. Roy has articulated, is that if you are a member of the majority, we know, of course, you're not going to consider discharge petitions filed by Democratic members, which is a tragedy. But what I did not realize until this morning is that Speaker Johnson had dictated a new rule in the House, which is that any member of the majority cannot pursue a discharge petition. That if you pursue one, it will be dispatched with ease by the Republican-controlled Rules Committee. What a shame. What a shame. I yield to the ranking.
No, I just want to make one final point here, and let's cut through all the BS. I mean, what is happening here is the minority, is a minority in this House is upending the majority will. The majority in this House, Democrats and Republicans, believe we should have a debate and a vote on the Lunar Amendment. And a minority is deciding that we should not have that. My friends have no problem with the president, doing his job remotely from a golf course in Mar-a-Lago, but somehow you're all upset about, a new parent being able to stay with their child and still be able to participate in the legislative process. And I think Representative Luna called this whole process accurately called out this whole process accurately for what it is, and that is corruption. This is corruption. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Yeah, I thank the gentleman. Republican members in the past have, I pledge, Madam Chair, my last remark, but I will just simply say this. Republican members have pursued discharge petitions over the course of the last 2.5 years that I've signed, that my colleagues on this dais have signed, with the understanding that this was a vehicle by which the House could consider legislation that had significant support. And I will be very reluctant. I don't know if Mr. Stubbe plans on voting for this rule. I remember his discharge petition less than a year ago that was successful. Nobody tried to stop Mr. Stubbe, Republican member from Florida, from pursuing his discharge petition. Not one of you. No one said, no, we're going to push into this rule an ability to preclude him from having his discharge petition considered on the floor. So it's rich to do this now. And I would be very skeptical that you're going to see much support for any Republican-led discharge petition from here on out, given the way in which the majority is conducting itself on this. It is unfortunate. I know for a fact that there are members on your side of the aisle who disagree, beyond Ms. Luna, disagree with the approach that's being taken here, and I hope they express their views on the floor.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for
The
roll
amendment, the gentleman has asked for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack? No. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Ms. Leslie Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leslie Fernandez? Aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair? No.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any other amendment or discussion?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike Section 4 of the rule, which provides a duplicative closed rule for consideration of the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is only in this rule to intimidate Republicans into voting for it. It was already in the rules package. That you could call it up today. You could have called it up last week if you wanted to. Again, Representative Luna, I think, called this whole process corruption. And again, I'm particularly amused by the fact that the gentleman from Texas went on and on about how we need a more open process when it came to proxy voting for new parents, and yet twice we are bringing up the SAVE Act under a completely closed rule where there is no opportunity for anyone to offer any amendments. I just find that rich. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not
Ask
agreed
for a
to.
roll call.
Gentleman asked for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack? No. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Ms. Leslie Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leslie Fernandez? Aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair? No.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any other amendment or discussion?
Yes, just a reminder to everybody, this is a closed rule. I think Republicans are doing what they do best, and that is blocking amendments. But I have another amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendments number 3, 4, and 13 to H.R. 2, offered by Representative Johnson, which allows individuals to register to vote in person, online, or by mail, create a private right to action, and establishes criminal penalties if an election official were to deny a U.S. citizen who is otherwise eligible to vote the right to vote, and establish the right to an immediate hearing within 24 hours by a district court to review the denial of a right to vote, respectively.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
Yes, I believe these are the amendments offered by Ms. Johnson last night. I thought they were well
Ms.
taken.
Scanlon, you're recognized.
I'm sorry. I think these are the amendments that were offered by Ms. Johnson last night. I thought they were well taken, and they address some of the obvious deficiencies in this bill. So I would wholeheartedly support the amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed
Ask
to.
for a roll call, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern's asked for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
Is it on the amendment? No.
Yeah.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack? No. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Aye. Madam Chair? No. Madam Chair? No.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there further discussion on the rule?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you're recognized. Oh, sorry, Ms. Scanlon.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 9 to H.R. 22, offered by Representative Dexter, which would prevent this bill from taking effect within a state unless the state certifies that implementation of the bill would not lead to disenfranchisement of eligible military voters. Madam Chair, our men and women in uniform put their lives on the line to protect us and defend our Constitution every single day. It's ironic, then, that the thanks they get from the Republican majority is to make it impossible for them to register to vote while stationed overseas and in combat zones. Why? Because this bill requires that you show up in person to register to vote. My office has addressed this issue with numerous constituents who've been stationed or otherwise had reason to be overseas and have had difficulty registering to vote. So let's not add to the burden on military families by making it even harder for them to vote for their political leaders. I urge a yes vote on my amendment. I yield back.
Yeah.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Yeah,
Mr.
Madam,
McGovern.
I just want to support the gentlewoman's amendment. You know, again, our military deserve to be able to easily participate in our democracy. Gentleman from Texas, again, you know, said he thinks kind of an open process is important. But I do want to point out that once we pass this rule here out of committee, the Republicans will have passed 29 closed rules, 3 structured rules, and 0 open rules. 90% of the rules that have come out of this Republican majority have been completely closed. And so I think this would, you know, we can break that streak a little bit by making some of these amendments in order, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the
I'd
noes
ask-
have it. The
I'd
amendment
ask
is not
for a
agreed to.
recorded vote.
Ms. Scanlon requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack? No. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse? Aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair? No.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Further discussion, are there further amendments?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 21 to H.R. 22 offered by myself. Republicans keep saying that this does not disenfranchise voters. In fact, they put up a post that said that the SAVE Act would make it easier for women to vote. There are 69 million women who have changed their names in the United States, and it is not easier when you have to jump through extra hurdles just to register to vote. To say that it is easier when you have to jump through extra hurdles to register to vote is disingenuous, to say the least. In New Hampshire, which passed something similar to this, they had women turned away at the polls. One woman, Brooke Young, had to go to her polling place 3 times to prove who she was. The first time, she didn't have her proof of citizenship. Second time, she brought her birth certificate, but the name didn't match the driver's license. The third time, she brought her marriage license. She finally got to vote. Well, guess what? The SAVE Act does not allow you to use your marriage license as to show that you are eligible to vote if your name doesn't match. So the SAVE Act will make it harder for women to vote. The second part of my amendment addresses the fact that rural voters will have to now register in person to show their documentation. They will not be able to register online and in the mail. If you live in certain counties that are rural like mine, or for example, in Representative Gosar's district or Representative Siscomani's district, you're going to be driving 2 to 8 hours round trip to take your documentation. This does not make it easier to vote. So I suggest my amendment, which would make it easier to vote, which would allow women to attest to the fact that they've had a name change, and which would waive the requirement for in-person registration if you live more than 30 minutes from the locale that you would have to register at. That would be truly making it easier to vote, and therefore the Republicans' post about how SAVE Act makes it easier might come a little bit closer to truth. And with that, I yield back and urge a yes vote on my amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chairman, I would just,
Mr. Roy?
all I would do is just add on the point of that reference is that you're able to use your marriage certificate to be able to demonstrate any question that arises, but through the state procedures, which is what the bill contemplates. It doesn't list it out in the things, but we don't list out every document. We list out a specific set of documents for purposes of demonstrating citizenship. But if you have to go present information, you can present it through the state procedures, which the bill contemplates.
Madam Chair?
Mr.
Yeah, first of all, nothing in the bill says that. So read your own bill. Nothing in the bill says that. And again, we could debate this on the floor, and we're just asking for it to be made in order.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The gentlewoman asked for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy? No. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin? No. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack? No. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern? Aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair? No.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Hearing no further discussion, the question's on the amendment from the gentleman from Virginia. All those in favor signify by on the motion from the gentleman from Virginia. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. In the opinion of the chair, those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion's agreed to. Gentleman asked for a roll call. Roll call, the clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
Yes.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, aye. Mr. Jack?
Aye.
Mr. Jack, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Leslie Fernandez? Ms. Leslie Fernandez, no. Madam Chair?
Aye.
Madam Chair, aye.
The clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, will be managing the rule for the majority,
And I will for the minority.
and Mr. McGovern for the minority. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.